So, JC, really happy to have you on the podcast. Appreciate you taking the time. Big shout out to Mark for making the introduction. I have like a million questions. You seem like the most productive person that I've had on the podcast. You started so many different things at such a young age. Maybe a quick question is maybe who inspires you? Like any sources of inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people around me inspire me, but I remember reading at some point the biography of Elon Musk, by Ashley Vance, and that was very, very inspirational. And today I really enjoy reading about Marcus Aurelius, and he's a great inspiration on building something meaningful. And
Very cool. Yeah, I actually just finished Meditations like this summer. I just sat down during the pandemic to read it. I'm like, really good book for like how many thousands of years. Um, and you spoke about Elon Musk, right? And like his crazy companies that he started. It seems like every company he starts is kind of crazier and wackier than the next, but it's hard to bet against the guy. Um, we're going to talk about Fuse a little bit, but curious as to to maybe unpack that a little bit because it seems like you're also tackling a big ambitious goal. What was it after you finished reading that biography that made you want to like tackle like a big challenge?
um, I don't think it's one thing. It's the culmination of different things, and part of my soul searching uh, started when I was at CJAP, and I hated it. I hated going to school, and I don't know what I was going to do in my life. I did some research at McGill, worked on some like cool tech, but I went back and asked myself, like, what does like JC, the kid, the 8, 10 year old, loved reading and doing. And I was fascinated by space travel and like interstellar travel, and like discovering what happens among the stars and beyond. And this was kind of the innate kind of curiosity that was born, and I wanted to chase that and go find and go pursue the thing that got me very excited as a kid and happy. um, and part of that search came like fusion, which sounds out there, but chemical rockets today are very, very difficult, almost impossible to be used for interstellar travel. And the only way that we know of today is that could enable interstellar travel is fusion drives, or like atomic rockets. And so the way that one way that the story of Elon inspired taking action is that there's nothing that's too big, I think, to dream of. And Elon is a testament of making space travel much cheaper, building electric cars, soon implementing a chip in a human's brain, etc. So really, the limit is one that we put on ourselves, and that kind of one way that this biography inspired to challenge the limit that we put for ourselves and our ambition.
Yeah, I think it's a very good way to put it, right? We're just limited by what we see in front of us, and we've just expanded the horizons a little bit. If you look up into the sky, there's literally it's infinity, right? So if you just keep looking,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think it could be a good segue to talk about Fuse for a bit. I want to go back to some of your other projects as well, but I'd like to learn a little bit about Fuse since you mentioned, fusion as something that you're working on. First guest that I've had on the podcast that works on fusion as this huge potential solution to many multifaceted challenges, right? From ecological disaster to war between nations. There's so many different facets and promises of this technology. So maybe as a first question, before we talk about fusion, maybe what is fusion?
Yeah. So the simplest way to explain fusion is to look at the sun. So what keeps the sun burning is fusion, and it's two hydrogen isotopes. You put them together under very high temperature and density and pressure. They fuse together, and so the two hydrogen come together. They generate helium, and this helium is slightly less heavy than the sum of the two hydrogen. And this small loss of mass of E mc squared, the famous equation, the small loss of mass multiplied by c squared, which is an enormous number, gives you an enormous amount of energy. And so that's fusion. It's what powers the sun. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer.
That's pretty good answer. It seems very scientific. um, obviously, people have been trying to do this, right? I think it's the first. They came up with like in the 70s and 60s, right? Like, what are you specifically trying to do with your startup, Fuse?
Yeah, so the concept has been there for, I mean, physicists have been looking at fusion for like 100 years or more, and and um, and the main challenge is, we don't have on Earth. It's hard to produce fusion because we need to input a lot of energy. So the main problem with fusion is that the amount that it takes to make fusion happen, the amount of energy that it takes to make fusion happen is greater than the amount of energy you're producing. So overall, you're losing energy. But the fundamentally, like the physics of how fusion happens is fairly well understood, and it's been studied for like a century. So the problem has been mostly like an engineering problem of how do we increase the efficiency of it's called the Q, the coefficient, so we can get to a net gain of energy. So the energy out is equal and eventually greater than the energy in. And at that point, we're not losing energy, and then we can start, using fusion in like real life, and get our society to transition towards fusion energy. Um, one of the concepts that's most popular is the Tokamak that's gained popularity is the Tokamak concept, and this is what let's say ITER in France is doing. It's a multinational project. I think there's like it's more than $20 billion invested right now in that project, and so there's this kind of traditional or like a popular way of fusion. And so Fuse is looking at is taking a different approach where we're trying to, um, we don't know there's no scientific certainty of what topology or like what device is going to achieve fusion. There's a lot of hypotheses, and all of them are backed by decades of research, but there's no proven method that we know this is the device that's going to get to Q equals to 1, to net energy gain. And so what the approach that Fuse is taking there is instead of going to raise like hundreds of millions and bet on like science, we're taking a different approach where we're trying to um, to bet on the people and the right like culture. So we have like the process is 10x cheaper, 10x faster, and we're able to iterate through different like all those alternative topologies that were buried at some point in history, and try to prove ourselves to be less wrong every day about like how does it work, and what device can get us to fusion. And right now we're working on a concept called the sheared flow stabilized Z pinch, which is a device that started a part of a military experiment, and then proved over the last 2 decades to get to very good results in terms of like producing thermonuclear neutrons, which is what's the useful byproduct of the reaction. And so we're working on this topology and trying to get it to higher coefficient of energy.
And your particular approach that you're working on, you mentioned there's several approaches. So why have you decided this particular approach, or are you taking multiple bets beyond the one that you just described?
Yeah, so at the moment we're focused on this one. That being said, we're constantly exploring and having conversation with different like scientists or engineers who are working on different topologies. And also the way we've set up our like company, and we have like a big warehouse down like south of Montreal, and we have like a machine shop, and we're setting it up so that if we need to build something, we have the in-house capabilities to build that cheaper and faster than somewhere else. So right now we're focused on this topology because it seems the most promising and fairly cheap to build, like and a couple of millions we can get to show very very good results, and within a short like time scale, like 1 to 3 years, within the next like 2 to 3 years we can prove if we can get some useful data out of this experiment. And so this is kind of how we're approaching it at this stage.
What's your biggest constraint to figuring it out? Is it getting money? Is it hiring researchers, which is kind of the same as money, or is it a more is it asking the right questions, like having the right hypothesis and testing it? So I'm curious as to where the main constraints lie today.
Yeah, so it's actually a mix of all of those things, and that's what make it complex. The talent, first of all, is people are not like I often find myself, let's say, at universities having to talk about what is fusion because the students are not as it's not this super exciting thing that people are talking about every day, even though it's incredibly exciting, but it's just not talked about as often. So we're having to like educate kind of talent to come into fusion and like know that this is not some like batshit science fictions that like two dudes and a dog in a garage are working on. Like this is a real industry and we're getting close and we need the talent to work on it. So there's definitely a talent gap, but that's getting better and better over time. In terms of money, most of those topologies that I mentioned, the alternative topologies, alternative to tokamak, have been dependent on government funding. So it's been a professor basically who's waiting for like government grants to build their experiment, and then we didn't get the government grant, so we couldn't get money, we didn't build it. So there's definitely uh, the money component that has been very sporadic and volatile because, say, one cycle of Congress, we need to invest in fusion, we didn't get to great results, so we don't invest, and fusion projects died, and again, we get some funding. So it's been very uh, like sporadic, and that's where some fusion experiments didn't continue to flourish. Like they were blocked at some point by capital and capital investment. I mean, maybe 3 years ago would have been really, really hard to justify from like a venture perspective. Like if you're an angel or a VC who wants to invest in fusion, it's very hard to justify that investment. Now, the super exciting thing is the world almost changed over the last 12 months when we've seen sovereign wealth funds like Temasek invest in two fusion startups. We've seen like a couple of old giants invest in fusion companies, and some of those cowboys we see is like Steve Jurvetson or Kosla who actually invested, and obviously there's all the um, the Bezos breakthrough energy ventures, so like Gates, etc., sort of philanthropic capital that started flowing in. So capital is starting to reach that tipping point, and this is like really, really, really awesome. Um, and then in terms of the last point that you mentioned, which is the science, there's a lot of science today that could be leveraged for fusion, and it's once we're able to attract different talent and get the right players across the table, now we can like find ways to exploit different technologies, like using like cutting edge computing technologies for fusion and like other you know tech that could be leveraged. And as we're building this, there's always thinking from first principles about like what's the problem and trying to approach different problems from first principles. So there's definitely that, and most of the engineers, I mean, most of us on the team are working on problems that we've never worked on before, so we have to learn how to understand the problem to some extent, and then figuring out, okay, how do we approach this? Like this problem has not been solved, or this problem it's barely understood. So you have to go and like try to understand it, and then figure out solutions that could allow us to overcome those challenges. So it's a mix of everything.
Yeah, yeah. No, it seems like it's such a daunting challenge. So yeah, like hats off for tackling this. I guess maybe if we fast forward or maybe project into the future, I know it's still early, but I'd love your opinion on what you think the early commercialization use cases will look like, right? So assuming within a few years you do have something that's working, what do you think will be those early cases?
Yeah, certainly. So, and that's one of the reasons why we went with the topology that we're going with now is that it's a super compact device, like a device that could fit in a 40 feet container. So it's really compact, really awesome. And so um, and the way to look at it is every like neutron yield. So every so it's like instead of thinking of revenue or whatever, it's like every time we get to a neutron milestone, this could enable for a certain application. And so we've seen fusion companies pivot into health, into the health sector. So they can, neutron generation, neutron generators can be used for like cancer therapy. It can be used for like medical isotopes production at certain stage. It could also be used for radioactive waste management. So all those nuke plants that have a ton of radioactive waste, you could use like a fusion device that generates neutrons to bombard those radioactive waste and reduce their lifetime, their half-life. Um, we could also use it to make a hybrid device. So we can make a hybrid of fusion and fission plants for like thorium, for example. Um, so yeah, there's and ultimately the thing the best application is putting fusion on the grid, and at that point, like powering cities and transportation through fusion energy. And maybe the last one that's a bit out there is building fusion drives, and that's where we can go surf across the solar system.
Yeah, can't wait for warp speed, right?
So,
Um, what's it like? So I mean,
but
I'm not
yes,
an energy expert, but yeah, one area I'd like to unpack is the difference between, let's say, an existing technology that works, which is nuclear, that increasingly seems safe and reliable, versus fusion. So what's the difference between the two?
yeah, I mean, fusion is a form of nuclear like tech, right? So there's fission, which is what usually is known today as nuclear. So it's when you're breaking like complex atoms, you're breaking them, and this like fissure of bonds is what liberates, is what generates energy. And then there's fusion, where you're combining the two atoms, the two molecules, right? So fission has been what's been the most like adopted today, like around nuclear, but they're both like nuclear energy, just different process. So there's fission where you're breaking, and a fusion where you're merging.
Interesting. And is there greater potential by combining, but with fusion, like in terms of long-term potential?
Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with fission, you have all the radioactive nuclear waste. So right, so you're producing radioactive waste that's like thousands of years of half-life, and also so it's not clean source of energy. When you're talking was fusion, and also the fuel is uranium, right? So and sustaining uranium and like storing it and recycling it, and all of this is not a clean source of energy. When you're talking with fusion, the fuel is seawater, right? So it's as abundant that there's water on the planet. So you're using water to produce energy, and then your byproduct is helium-4. So you're producing helium as a byproduct and neutron. So basically, your waste is green. You're producing helium. So you have no radioactive waste, and you're using like literally seawater to create your reaction. So you're dealing with a clean, it's abundant as oceans and water is on the planet, safe. There's no radioactive waste that you're leaving off, and it's on demand. There's no seasonality. There's no like solar, for example, where you're waiting for the sun to shine or like the wind to blow, etc. So it's on demand, safe, clean, and abundant source of energy.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's
scalable,
really
green,
the
like you
holy
mentioned,
grail.
and
It's really the
exactly. Yeah.
holy
And
grail.
yeah, for anyone that's seen Chernobyl on HBO, yes, the nuclear can have dangers as well. And like you said, we've seen more recent examples, right? Like in Japan. So having something that's safe is obviously not a small thing. It seems to me as we're talking that you're big thing that you're doing requires ambition and it requires thinking big. You mentioned like this talent need, finding people that share the same ambition and vision. Maybe to switch gears to talk about another project that you've been working on, which is Young Leaders. So I'd like to hear you and riff a little bit about this project related and very much to ambition and big ideas and big goals.
Yeah, yeah. Before we jump off, I just want to say that it's as you've heard, like fusion is a mission, and for it's a shame plug, but any passionate fusion person would love to have that to meet and chat. And Fuse is constantly hiring and growing to teams, so would love for anyone who's interested in fusion would love to chat and connect. Um, but
Sounds
but
good.
yeah,
I'll
so
put the
so
link
going
in the
back,
show notes as well.
sure, thank you. So for young leaders, yeah, I mean, young leaders started as I came. I mean, I when I left Lebanon, I thought that coming to Canada is going to be the place where school is less boring, more interesting, more cool, futuristic stuff. But I came here and it was really as boring as in Lebanon. So there wasn't as much change. And Young Leaders was born where I wanted to basically find a community that where teenagers wanted to build stuff and talk about like flying cars and rockets and like cool futuristic stuff. And so it started as really trying to find like a group of friends and the community of teenagers who wanted to self-learn, build, and talk about those topics. And it evolved as my frustration with school continued to evolve. It evolved into trying to find new ways for teenagers to learn and experimenting, learning by building and self-learning was minimal structure. And so that's kind of how it got started.
Yeah, it's very cool. And maybe a sense of the impact so far, like how many people have joined, and maybe a broader like how do you see it developing over the next few years?
Yeah, it hasn't been much. It's been maybe every year we've had two cohorts of around 10 people each, so maybe around 20 teenagers so far. And now there's another academy where an online academy where we have around 16 Hestians and like a lot more on the wait list. But the reason is, I find it very hard to really deliver value to a human. And I'm a firm believer that really investing and putting energy into a project and focusing on maximizing the chances of it going well versus just like shotgun approach of let's try to uh, you know uh, have thousands of people or invest in 10,000 projects and hopefully one of them will work versus we want to find a couple of teenagers and really spend time on delivering value to them. So that's been our approach. Long term, just definitely the pandemic has let's say magnified a benign tumor, and like most teenagers hate Zoom school. They're realizing, like, come on, I'm not going to pay 50K to stream Harvard. And Actually, I've had a bunch of Harvard students saying, we're taking a year off from Harvard, would love to come work uh, or like do something because yeah, we came to Harvard for the student life and for all the stuff, and now I could find it meaningless to just watch lectures online where and like EDX offers some of them for free, right, or other places. So that's been like a huge shaker for the whole industry, and so there seems to be a movement where even parents. I mean, on Twitter, I follow I have a tech following, so a lot of parents actually started realizing, holy shit, this is what my kids are learning at school. This is so ridiculous, and my kids have been learning so much more by doing things that they like at home. And so this kind of pandemic has served to some extent to open the eyes of people on some of the problems that education has been, I think, um, has been kind of going on with. And so there's a movement where people and teenagers and parents are becoming more aware of how much self-learning can be done by on their own with the right guidance. There's a lot more edtech startups out there that are being created that are focused on self-learning and homeschooling and all these patterns. And there's like folks like 1517 Fund that created I think the Invisible College, where they fund people for 50K to not go back to school and work on a project. And there's obviously and so there's programs that started emerging for this cycle. And the way that we see ourselves is and with Hestia Academy is being an online academy for self-learners and trying to make self-learning a habit. So for teenagers who want to learn, just like you commit to your code on GitHub, you can commit to self-learning and being mission driven. So it starts with being mission driven, putting your mission, setting some milestones, and then making continuous progress and recording that progress so you can compound on your knowledge. And the last point is like not to do it alone. And that's where we have the right mentors that are there to ask questions, and a community of people that make you feel like you belong, and you have some folks around you to share ideas and like find symbiotic connections.
Yeah,
But over,
that's amazing, JC, and I really like the aspect you mentioned of, well, the impact. I think what's, this pandemic has made clear is that the education system is broken in so many ways, and none of the learning is personalized or adapted to what, what people like and want to be doing, right? It's all this like copy paste formulaic approach, that we invented in the 20s, that we still, for whatever reason, is still sticking around, right? The 20s from 100 years ago. So I like your approach, and I think it's a very interesting way to kind of like innovate in the space outside of the bounds of the traditional establishment. Maybe a final question or two is like, what are you
yeah.
most excited about beyond what we spoke about? So beyond learning, beyond energy, are there other areas that you've been thinking about, learning about? It could be in any domain. Just curious to pick your brain.
Yeah. But one last thing about Hesse before I answer this is we also give grants to teenagers, and we trust them with money. So we give them to start $500. They can spend it however they want, and we believe people should be paid to learn rather than pay and be in debt to learn and then serve society. And if you think we charged Elon or some of those people to learn, and now they're basically pushing our civilization forward, whereas we should be thankful for some of those humans to be pushing our civilization. I mean, everybody has imperfections, but overall they're pushing the edge of our whole civilization. So other than energy and education, well, two things that I passively look at and chat with founders in the space: so crypto. And I think you're Greek, so you might have lived some of that financial crisis at some point. Lebanon is going through crazy financial times, and I find it absurd to some extent that how much control the government has, and like the currency is such um, let's say centralized and controlled by certain like power. And it seems very obvious to me that we should have like internet is his own word at this point, its own country to some extent. And it was all the globalization that is happening. It seems super obvious to me that we should have like a digital currency that is encrypted, therefore cryptocurrency for the world. And so that's one space that I'm excited about and passively look at. Um,
Anything
the
particular
other
in
space,
crypto, or are you like more? Yeah, sorry for the
sorry.
lag. I was just curious, is it Bitcoin specifically, or is it more generally decentralized finance? So, are there any areas that within crypto that you're interested in?
Decentralized in general. Bitcoin has so many, I think, technical limitations. So I'm not. I'm also not very versed in the topic to comment, but from my humble research, I understand like Bitcoin has a lot of technical limitations, so it's probably not going to be the currency that's widely adopted. But again, that's just from my humble understanding. Um, but I'm more. in general interested in how can we create like a currency that is digital, that's like privacy, that's decentralized basically, that's going to revolutionize how we like send and exchange, let's say, goods between humans across the planet. And then
Great. Yeah, great. You were I interrupted you. You were about to go into another subject, so sorry for cutting you off before.
no worries. The second thing is super exciting, is like the brain stuff that's going on, and a bit what Neuralink is doing. I think that's super fascinating. I mean, there's two things. There was one quote, I think Michio Kaku had said that at some point. There's two things that rule our lives that we don't understand. It's the universe and our brain. So we don't understand the universe yet. All of nature and all of us live in it, and we barely understand our brain, but it dictates how we behave and like how we do everything that we do. Well, most of what we do. So it's super exciting to see how we can. What's going to happen there, whether in understanding it, whether in you know using computing like technologies to exponentiate how much we make use of it, etc. So that's an area that's super exciting to me too. I mean, there's a lot
Yeah,
of super
JC, I
exciting stuff. I
feel.
can keep going forever.
I was gonna say, I could keep going with you on for like hours just riffing on these subjects, but I want to be respectful of your time. I think this has been an amazing conversation. Last question I'd ask you, JC, is where can people reach out, connect with you, and just find out more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so there's my email is jc at f dot energy. So very simple, jc at f dot energy. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, JC Btaiche, and on Twitter, JC Btaiche 10. I'm not super active on tweeting. I just learn and digest good content on Twitter.
Very cool. Shokran. Thank you so much, JC.
All right, thank you for having me.